Iran is fighting alone, and the question everyone is asking is why did nobody come to help? But I think the more important question is why did Iran ever believe that anyone would? Because deep down, I feel Iran always knew. It always knew that Russia and China would not show up in a deep, extreme war crisis. This was the understood thing between Iran and its so called allies. Otherwise, it would have been formalized, a mutual defense treaty, a binding obligation, but that never happened. And the reason it never happened tells you everything about the nature of these relationships. For more than 2 decades, Iran built its national security on two pillars. The first was the axis of resistance, a network of proxy militias positioned in an arc around Israel. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and the Houthis in Yemen. The logic was simple. If anyone attacked Iran directly, these groups would simultaneously open 4 or 5 fronts, making the cost of touching Iran unbearable. The second pillar was the transactional partnerships with Russia and China. Russia provided weapons and diplomatic cover at the United Nations. China provided cash, purchasing roughly 90% of Iran's sanctioned crude oil at steep discounts. In return, Iran gave Russia cheap combat drones for Ukraine and gave China discounted energy. These were never alliances, they were business arrangements dressed in diplomatic language. Now, here is the thing: Russia and China themselves knew that Iran was not capable of helping them beyond the cheap oil and cheap drones. So they also never entered into any binding obligation. Iran was under extreme sanctions, and survival alone was its victory. Russia and China, as adversaries of the Western Bloc, simply helped Iran stay afloat. And because Iran suffers from what I would call an Islamic hangover, a rigid theological posture that limits how far pragmatic powers want to commit, the maximum cover they ever provided was diplomatic cover. Nothing more. The two pillars were supposed to work together. Proxies would make direct strikes too costly, while great power partners would make diplomatic isolation impossible. Remove both simultaneously, and the entire architecture collapses. And the collapse of the first pillar was not sudden. It was a methodical, multi year campaign that Israel began after the October 7, 2023 Hamas attack. And the most important thing is, Israel did not attack all the proxies at once, it attacked them one by one, ensuring that the coordinated multi front response they were designed for never materialized. First, Hamas, its leadership eliminated, tunnel and network destroyed, fighting capacity reduced to zero. Then Hezbollah, Nasrallah and top commanders killed. Southern Lebanon invaded. By November 2024, Hezbollah was a fundamentally different organization. Then Assad's regime fell in late 2024, severing the physical supply line connecting Iran to all its proxies. And finally, in mid 2025, Israel struck the Houthi leadership in Yemen. And the Houthis went completely silent. They watched what happened to Hamas and Hezbollah and chose self preservation over loyalty to Tehran. And this exposes the fundamental flaw of outsourced deterrence. Proxies are not divisions of a national army. They are semi autonomous organizations with their own survival instincts. When the existential moment arrived, each proxy looked after itself first. Hezbollah fought for its survival in Lebanon, not for Iran's survival. Hamas explicitly declined to intervene. The Houthis went dark. Now, while Iran relied on these proxies, deep down it knew they could not scale up to a full fledged war with even Israel. But Iran was hopeful, optimistic even, that it would become a nuclear power before something like this happened. And this would act as the real deterrence. Israel knew this too. And that it exactly why Mossad is so important for Israel, because Mossad made sure that Iran kept failing in its pursuit of nuclear weapons. And of course, the CIA was right there alongside them. Israel knew it would not be easy to go full attack against Iran until the October 7 attack gave it the excuse to take out the proxies one by one and then eventually go after Iran itself. And during this entire period, they made absolutely sure Iran did not get its hands on the bomb. That is the proliferation paradox. North Korea, which possesses nuclear weapons, watched this entire crisis from a position of absolute invulnerability. This lesson is brutally simple. If you have nuclear weapons, nobody touches you. When the February 28 strikes came, nearly 900 coordinated strikes hit 17 provinces. Nuclear facilities at Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan were destroyed. The leadership compound in North Tehran, where Khamenei was holding an emergency meeting, was stuck. Khamenei was killed along with 30 to 40 senior figures, including IRGC commanders and the defense minister. Iran lost not just its supreme leader, but the entire command layer of the state. Where were the partners? Russia watched. Its cooperation treaty with Iran, signed just months earlier, deliberately excluded any mutual defense obligation. That was not an oversight, that was the foundational truth of the relationship. China's collapse was even more complete. 50% of China's oil imports transit through the Strait of Hormuz, the exact waterway Iran threatens. And with Trump expected in Beijing for trade talks in April 2026, China chose its largest trading relationship over a discounted oil supplier without hesitation. And indeed, if there is any country apart from Iran that has lost credibility through this crisis, not only as a strategic partner but as a defense power as well, it is China. By all means, China should have come forward in some way, but it was largely on the sidelines. And that has sent a strong message to everyone. China cannot be relied upon when things get real. And maybe China also lacks the ability for a real war. For many Indians, too, this should send a strong message. Stop going gaga over China just to put down India and specifically the Indian government. And this is maybe because dictator parties like the CPC and so called strongmen like Putin function like proxies themselves. They lack the backing of the state and the common people as a mandate. And that shows in situations like these. You cannot project power abroad when your legitimacy at home is manufactured. Now look at Turkey. It is ironical that Turkey, which has always been hostile towards India, is part of NATO, comprising the same EU that just signed a major deal with India. Turkey wants to become the Khalifa of the Islamic world, just like Iran wanted to be, but it lacks nuclear weapons. Unlike Pakistan, with whom it shares great rapport. But just like the Arab countries, Turkey is heavily under the grip of the EU and NATO and has remained silent. When a stray Iranian missile entered Turkish airspace, a US Navy destroyer shot it down and near Incirlik air base. And Turkey quietly increased NATO coordination instead of standing with Iran. It seems like the OIC has no credibility left. On the lighter side, it is merely an Islamic extension of NATO at this point. As for India, its position is least about the United States and more about Israel. While the US and India have a strategic partnership based on technology, migration, and trade, India and Israel share a deep bond spanning decades despite formal diplomatic ties existing for just over 30 years. India is one of those few places on earth where Jews did not face anti Semitism. And Israel has never forgotten that. Not even through the 70s, when India was aligned with the Arab cause and had no formal ties with Israel. During the 1971 war, when Iran armed Pakistan, Israel covertly diverted advanced weaponry to the Indian armed forces. During the 1999 Kargil War, Israel expedited emergency delivery of UAVs and laser guided bomb kits. And on the contrary, Iran, the self proclaimed Khalifa of the Islamic world, always pointed fingers at India over Kashmir, grouping it with Gaza and Yemen. India's calculation was governed by overwhelming realities. 10 million Indian expatriates in the Gulf, 88% of its crude oil from the region, and $45 billion in annual remittances. The United States sweetened India's neutrality with a 30-day sanctions waiver for Russian oil. Classic diplomacy, making it easier to stay on the sidelines than to take a stand. So, why is Iran fighting alone? Because it built its entire national security on assumptions about other actors' behavior, and every one of those actors behaved exactly as self interest theory predicts. The proxies chose themselves. Russia chose Ukraine. China chose its trade deal with America. India chose its workers at energy security. Turkey chose NATO. Iran did not just lose a war, it provided a masterclass in what happens when every pillar of your security is built on someone else's loyalty. And loyalty in international politics is the first casualty when the cost of maintaining it exceeds its value. Thanks for watching. Please do like, subscribe, and share your views on this matter in the comment section. Namaste.